Welcome to the Wonder Boldly podcast, hosted by yours truly, Christine, founder of Drizzle Academy. I am going to encourage and motivate you to take action towards your big goals. I'm going to teach you everything I've learned from building a very successful 25-year career, coaching people, and starting my own online business. I am going to give you so many action items. You are going to be able to wonder boldly. Hello, and welcome to another episode of Wonder Boldly. Today we are here with Julie Menden, who is somebody who has certainly wondered boldly. She was in corporate and she transitioned to leaving corporate and starting her own business. And I know you love to hear these stories, and I know you love to hear the real deal, that there are a lot of challenges and a lot of emotions. And Julie and I, before we even started today, I'll share with you, I was a little frustrated, got on this call with Julie because I was editing another podcast and I completely lost it. So, there are frustrations, whether it's losing material, whether it's a failed launch, so many things. And there are a lot of ups. One of the wonderful things that I have loved through this journey is meeting so many amazing people. And I think that has really been one of, if not the biggest joy of all of this for me. Opening up our worlds to meeting other either like-minded or people who are doing things that are completely different, that I'll speak for myself, I had no clue about that was going on in the world. And it's just so invigorating and exciting. So as you know, I love to bring folks on so you can hear other stories and hear the real deal, and maybe even leave you with some action steps that you can take if you are wondering about what the next steps are for you. So with all of that said, thank you so much, Julie, for being with us. And it is a pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you so much. I am so excited to be on here with you.
Thank you. So if we may, can we start with your story in corporate?
Yeah, definitely. And I have to say first, Christine, just that honesty of sharing your experience with losing the podcast. I think myself for sure, and anyone listening who has done something like that can definitely relate of those ups and downs and trying to learn those lessons. So thank you for sharing that. And again, thank you for having me on here. So as you mentioned, I'm Julie Menden. I worked in corporate for about 6.5 years. I worked largely in a large corporate organization, and then I did a brief stint in public sector as well. And most of my time was spent in training and leadership development. So I really worked on developing leaders throughout the organization of different levels. And that's really where I focused a lot of my time.
How long were you there?
6.5 years.
And is that in the corporate? Was that before the public sector?
Yeah. So it was about 6.5 years in corporate. And then I did public sector after that before I started my own business.
Awesome. Mm-hmm. And so what made you decide? I have so many questions and I'm trying to focus on and keep them organized. What made you decide to leave corporate and go to the public sector?
Oh, such a gold question. A few reasons. So the first one is, I have to say, I always thought I was going to, once I started working at the organization I was at, the large corporate organization, I thought I was going to be there forever. I loved it. I loved the culture. I loved what they were about. I loved my team. I loved all of it. And I think everyone else thought I was going to be there forever too. I also was externally very successful. I had grown up through the organization pretty quickly. I had a new position every year for 6 years that I was there. And I found myself in the most recent role before I had left as a new leader and totally overwhelmed, unfulfilled. I remember when I left, I had said to a leader of mine and a longtime mentor that my heart just wasn't in it anymore. I just felt like something was off. And so I started looking into other opportunities. And part of that was looking into coaching and wanting to start my own business. And also I wanted the opportunity to try out a totally different industry. So I wasn't quite ready to just make the total leap into starting a business. And knowing that I wanted to eventually work with organizations as a leadership coach, I wanted to experience what a totally different industry looked like. So I went from this retail, large corporate company to a really small company. So I'll say the corporate that I was at, it had altogether like 140,000 employees. And then when I made the transition to the small company, there was 32 people in the office. And it was a huge culture shock going from private sector to public sector, working with local government. And part of it was strategic, just to see what it looked like to experience another industry, what leadership challenges people had in another industry. And also I'll say the role that I took, I went from a full-time role in corporate to a part-time role to give me the space and opportunity to kind of step into my own business.
Very interesting. So I'm definitely going to grasp onto that. So you leave corporate and you had climbed the ranks, if you will, and had been there a while, and then it just didn't feel right anymore. And then you wanted to dip your toe in or try something completely different. And yet it sounds like you already had the vision of having your own company. So you decided to go part-time so you could kind of do both. Is that accurate?
Yes. Yeah, it was sort of this draw to want to start my own business, but I was one of the most risk-adverse people you would ever meet about 3 years ago. And I never would have fathomed I even had the desire to start a business until I started to get that. And I'm a very planful person. I'm a very inquisitive person. I ask a lot of questions. And someone said to me once, I poke holes in like someone's plan in a good way of like, I need to understand the whole thing. So for me, I could not just jump. I couldn't just make the total leap. And so it was part of that process was, how can I do something that still is going to grow my skills, that I still can offer a lot of value to this new organization, but it was half the amount of time I was working. So I opened up a lot of space for me to pursue the business.
And what were some of the risks that you were considering?
The risks in starting my business?
The risks in not taking the leap. So you went part-time in this other.
Yeah, I would say a couple things. So the first one just being, it was a totally new idea for me. You know, I had mentioned, like, I always thought you work for someone else, you work really hard, you grow through the organization, you offer a lot of value, and that's what you do. You play, quote unquote, play it safe, and you work for another company. And so when that no longer was fulfilling to me, that no longer was like, oh, that's what I want to do, that's the safe route anymore, it was scary to even think of making that transition. So I think, you know, for me, the biggest fear was, I don't know anything about starting a business. I have no idea what that looks like. And I mean, financially, obviously, you know, that's like elephant in the room when you talk about starting a business, is just you go from a corporate salary to starting from scratch, essentially. So that was a big fear, is how can I make sort of a smoother transition and step into it? And then also just, what if this isn't what I want to do? What if right now it sounds appealing to leave corporate and start a job, but what if it really isn't? So for me, it was just all of those things swirling, that it just wasn't right for me to just totally rip off the Band-Aid, which I eventually did, but creating more of that plan.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And so when you went into the public sector, did you have like, okay, so your two risks were finance and really leaving that old thought philosophy that you work for somebody, you work really hard and you're safe, and that's what we do in life, right? So that's a lot of mindset stuff. And then all of it's mindset stuff, right? And then with the financials, what kind of plan did you have? Were you like, okay, once I make X amount in my business, or how did you kind of decide to leave the public sector?
That's such a good question. That pointing out the mindset piece, that's a large part of what I work with clients on, because I know it's all mindset, right? It was the mindset of, can I do this? But you saying, yes, I can do this. It's just working for it and reframing and shifting that mindset. So that's the largest piece. And what's so interesting, Christine, is that when I think about my plan versus what happened, so I had the plan to stay in that job for a certain number of years. That was kind of the plan. Like, I'm going to, experience this. And maybe if I love it, maybe this is just where I want to stay. Or, I'm going to there's opportunity to be able to move that to full time. So it was like, let's kind of play in the sandbox here and try things out. But in my head going into it, I was like, all right, it was kind of a 5-year plan. I'll say it was 5 years. And then, all right, I'm going to totally go in. And this is where it's interesting, the mindset shift that has occurred in me over the last couple of years. I threw that whole plan out the window about a year. I was there for about a year and a half before I left. So about a year in, and I'll say largely in part due to a very supportive husband as well, who's very supportive of me and what I had to offer and what I wanted to do. A year and a half in, I left and started my own business and went full time into it. So definitely, and that was in the that was at the mid part of the pandemic, 2020. So talk about crazy, just throwing all of that, throwing the plan out the window and going, nope, this is what I meant to do. It's time to do it. And partly planful and partly just intuition.
So a couple of questions there. So what I'm hearing is somebody who is curious. So you were curious. Okay. So you corporate, not a fit anymore. Okay. Curious. What else is there? Could I start my own business? Let me try another arena. I'm still interested in starting my own business. I'm going to go part-time. Let me see what this is like. Maybe I'll love it. Maybe I won't, and then taking the leap from that to say it's kind of like a stepping stone, right? So in my estimation, the big leap was that corporate, right? Like out of there, then going part-time, right? Into a totally different arena. And then you did that. So now you're on another stepping stone, right? And then you're there. And I'm sure there's some details around that. But at a certain point, you're like, okay, plan out the window. This is not going to end up being something I love, right? And I'm feeling the joy, the nudge for my own business. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yep.
And so then you mentioned, which I'd love to dive into, listening to your intuition. And we talk so much about that in on this podcast, in my home life, like all the circles I'm in, we talk about intuition. And I believe that can be, for some folks, very challenging and really something that you need to learn. So we hear and talk about how as a young person, a child, you have that, right? And then society comes in and you lose a little bit of that. Maybe there's some anxiety, fear, all the things, right? And then it's understanding, okay, is this intuition? Is this my fear? How do you define intuition in the example you just gave? And then how do you apply that to your life?
Yeah, it's such a great point. I'm so glad that you honed in on that. Because I'll say that is definitely not where I was coming from, right? And so I think I'm a good example for anyone listening who feels like they don't have that nozzle turned in themselves to tune into their intuition, because I still am a pretty logical person. And so for me, I made decisions based on logic. And, when I talked about poking holes in things and trying to see the full picture and asking all the questions and trying to come up, I always say I'm a recovering perfectionist, because everything had to be quote unquote perfect before I took action on it. And that was actually even something I worked on in corporate, was just everything had to be well shaped and have all of the information. And I realized that, yes, it's important to have that information and be able to ask questions. It's part of my role as a coach. And also at some point it's trusting that gut, that intuition. And truly, I didn't even know what that was or what that felt like. Because I didn't think, when I think back now, there probably was times that I did, but most of the time I didn't listen to it. I wasn't tuning in to it. I was just making choices based on logic. And I think that's a skill that I've developed over the years as I, learned, and I went through training and worked with coaches and did a lot of that inner work myself. And then once you're an entrepreneur, it's a very strong skill set to have. So for me, I guess a couple of things for myself and for anyone listening that helps is it is like a muscle that you have to flex. And I say that a lot. It's flexing the muscle because it's increasing your awareness of yourself and what you're feeling and what you're thinking and how those thoughts are creating your actions. This whole process. Your thoughts are creating your feelings, which are creating your actions, which are creating your results. And oftentimes our thoughts are so unconscious to us, and we don't even realize the ripple effect that that's creating. And so for me, the first thing was just practicing, like listening more. And for some people feel it more in their body, like they're more connected to what does it feel like when you're trusting your intuition? Does your body feel more relaxed, or do you feel like you're more in the flow? Some people it's more, what does it look like? And they can more see like a visual when it feels like they're trusting their intuition. So for me, it was kind of playing around with it. And when I got to the point where I knew that I was no longer fulfilled. When I felt like my days were just, I wasn't looking forward to them. I didn't feel inspired. I didn't feel energized. To me, that was a huge cue that something's off and that I need to dig into that. So I think a lot of it is just practicing, flexing the muscle and getting more aware of what does it look like when you do trust your intuition? What does it look like when you make choices based on your intuition?
Yeah, I love that. And I think sometimes it's really for folks like myself, so I'm speaking from my own personal experience, very similar to you in that, whatever it was 3-4 years ago, I was not aware of my intuition. I can remember being a child and thinking I was actually clairvoyant because I was so in tune to my intuition. I'm like, oh, I think I think I'm clairvoyant. And as a young child, and that was long gone. And then being in corporate, I've been so conditioned, I'll say, that looking at data, looking at reports, looking at what needs to be done, and I really lost touch with it. And so the work to become more in touch for me was things like so simple, like, okay, maybe I'll wear this today. Well, no, I shouldn't wear that because something logical. I don't know, red, and it's not, I'm not doing XYZ, whatever. And instead, just like, for some reason, I want to wear this. So just wear it. Don't reason out of wearing it, just something simple like that. That's just one example, but really doing those exercises, again, speaking for myself, to find that intuition. And again, speaking for myself and other people I talk to, there's also as I touched upon, that is this intuition or is this fear-based, right? I think a lot of people struggle with that. Like, am I just afraid to leave my corporate job? Is this my intuition telling me I should, So it's like, okay, which is it, and how can I practice? So I always say, like I did, because it worked for me. It doesn't work for everybody, but start really small. Even things like, let me try to think of a good example, like wrapping. It's the holiday season, right? So wrapping paper, like, what wrapping paper do you feel like using? Well, I'll use this one because maybe I'll get this one because it's cheaper, or this one because it's, whatever. Just go with it. Just go with that feeling that you're having in the moment for those simple things, because that's exercising that muscle. Right. And you don't have to rationalize. You don't have to like, well, I don't know. Well, this one has got more paper on the roll and it's cheaper, but I really like this one. Just go with the one you really like,
I love those examples you use because, right, it sounds simple, but those are the more simple things that then when you practice doing that more in daily life, when it's picking an outfit, picking something, making a choice on food, like that was an example that came up for me. Sometimes you hear it as a joke, but people will say like, oh, what do you want to eat tonight? And you can't decide, or things like that. And that noise in your head that can be, oh, I really want pizza, but maybe I shouldn't have pizza, because just those simple things that then when you practice just going with, your gut, when it gets to more challenging things, more difficult things, you've built up that muscle to be able to do it and practice. And a word that came up for me, Christine, when you were talking about that, is just intuition. It's also just trusting yourself. I think we lose that self-trust, that we don't believe that we can make the right decision, or that the decision we're making is right for us. And it's part of that trusting yourself. And I think also we have so much noise in our head, and we're so fearful that we're going to make the wrong choice. I know for me, that was a large part, especially for people who are looking at kind of what their next step is or things like that. We're so fearful that we're going to make the wrong choice. We're so scared of doing something wrong or things not going right, that we're trying so hard to just like cling to all of the facts and information. And oftentimes what we find is when we do trust our intuition, when we do trust ourselves to make the right choice, things naturally unfold and you're more in the flow. And even if you make a choice that quote unquote like failed or that didn't go the right way, you are trusting yourself to know that you can figure it out and you can see what the opportunity is in that situation.
Yeah, exactly. And I love that. And that is such a huge win, right? So you start the exercise, you start just going with the flow, wearing what you want, eating what you want, that type of thing, and not overthinking things. And then certainly, of course, it's life. There'll come a point where you'll be like, oh, I shouldn't have done that, and learning from that that experience, then you can even actually ask yourself, did I kind of know that going in? And maybe you didn't, and that's fine. And then how do you move forward with, okay, so that was a bad choice, or air quotes, bad choice, but that wasn't the right decision. And knowing and building that self-confidence that it's not the end of the world, something you can move on from, something you can learn from. And that is such an important muscle to have, right? So I think that leads us right to where we were in your story of, so you move into this new sector and you think you're going to be there for 5 years. And after, I think you said a year and a half, you decide to leave. So, and start your own business. Tell us about that. Tell us about your business, what you're doing.
Yeah, definitely. So and during that process, again, because I created some plan in there, I had gone and gotten certified as a coach. So for me, a large reason why I got into doing what I do now, and I'm a leadership and performance coach. I do one-on-one coaching. I do keynote and public speaking around leadership, mindset, performance habits. And then I also do training and workshops for teams. And a large reason why I got into it was because of my story and that, my experiences, that I felt like as a high achiever, as this highly ambitious person, as this growing leader, I had so much self-doubt. Even though externally I looked successful, I really doubted myself. I did not trust my intuition. And I was always trying to make the right steps. And it filled me with a lot of anxiety. It filled me with a lot of that doubt of my abilities, to the point that I got there where I felt unfulfilled. I felt like my heart wasn't there anymore. And so that's really what sparked my interest into coaching and being able to support other people who were like me. And so I started my business largely to help new and emerging leaders within organizations that were growing through the same situation that I was in, and helping them to overcome that self-doubt. My business has sort of expanded into not only emerging leaders and organizations, but also entrepreneurs and small business owners, to really overcome that self-doubt, that overwhelm, imposter syndrome that we feel, and be able to step into our confidence to not only drive results that we want, but also feel joy and fulfillment along the way. That is a key part. I work with a lot of really successful leaders, business owners who are very externally successful, but they are filled with so much burnout and anxiety and just questioning themselves, and nobody would really even know that, right? So a lot of the mindset work too, of what does it look like to work on, I use mental fitness. How do you increase, and that's why I talk about the muscles. How do you increase your mental fitness to be able to handle and navigate all of the challenges that come with growing in your career, and not only have external success, but also feel excited and fulfilled when you're doing it.
I love that. I'm getting so fired up just listening to you. It's so great. I love that. And I know a lot of the folks listening to this podcast are exactly those folks. So as we kind of wrap up here, can you maybe give a couple of action steps or whatever you recommend? So if somebody's sitting there and thinking, wow, it sounds like Julie really has something here that can help me, what would be the first steps or action steps that you think that they would benefit from?
So some of the first things that I typically do with clients, and I'll say, and most likely the people who are listening to, having some type of vision or bigger goal that you want to achieve, whether it's that next level, whether it's taking that step into your business. So usually you're highly ambitious and a high achiever, which I imagine who's listening, and you want to achieve some goal, but you feel like you can't because X, Y, and Z. So the first step that I always do with people is to sit down and really create what that vision looks like for you. And so the first thing I would say is, this is a perfect, time of year, getting ready for, going into the new year and things like that, to set yourself up for a new year, is to really think about, what is my vision for myself 1 year from now? And oftentimes I do that. Of course, we can create 5-10-year visions. Those are exciting. But 1 year from now, what is your vision for yourself? And external and internal things. So externally, it might be what's my title? What role am I in? Where am I living? Who am I surrounding myself with? How much money am I making? If that's one of the things that's really important to you. But then it's also the internal things. 1 year from now, who am I? How am I showing up? How much fun am I having? So that would be the first step, is really start to get excited, create a vision that it's like a visualization that you can feel it, you can see it, you close your eyes and you can see yourself there. Then it would be to start breaking that vision down into what are those big milestones that will help you get there? What are those tangible goals that will help you get to that vision? And then doing some journaling or reflecting on what are the things that could get in your way, because that's where some of those things are going to come up, that mindset stuff. What are the things, what do you need to leave behind? I just did a post on this recently around getting yourself ready for a new month. You can use this any time of year, but what do you need to leave behind? Maybe it's the fear, maybe it's the self-doubt, maybe it's not trusting your intuition. And what do you need to bring with you? And so I would say that would definitely be a good first start, is figuring out where you want to go, the big milestones that will get you there, and what could get in your way, so that you can really set yourself up for success, to be able to figure out how you can create sort of your safeguards. If you know that you've been filled with a lot of fear or self-doubt, what are some things that you can work on doing? And some of the things there could be, meditating, taking walks, self-reflection, digging into your strengths, like times that you were really successful in something and you overcame those challenges. So reminding yourself of all of the strengths that you have in order to be successful in the goals that you have.
That is so good. And I know my audience is taking notes, and those are great tangible steps. So thank you so much for that. I think one thing there in addition is so that's sort of like you're saying, the vision and setting that. And I love that. And then additionally on the day-to-day, one thing that you said that resonated with me and my clients is, I like to say to prepare for what you anticipate might happen, meaning I have a meeting, maybe a sales pitch coming up. I have something coming up that I know there's going to be maybe a challenge there. And actually rehearsing that. So let's say it's a meeting. So I'm in a meeting. I know it's going to be a challenging conversation. Rehearse what you will say. How do you want to present yourself? So you're not maybe come with emotion at the time or stumbling over your words, whatever your situation is, but actually rehearsing it. And I always say that because 9 times out of 10, I think we fear things that are going to happen and it's not as bad as we think, right?
Yes.
But if you've prepared for at least what you know, something always comes out of left field. Something always comes up that you're like, I didn't even see that coming. And you've already prepared in a way that you've given yourself a good foundation from which you can respond, right? So I love that. And, in the corporate world, we call that, maybe they call it that in other worlds too, but risk mitigation, right? So identifying the risk, identifying the challenges, but then what will you do about that? So I love that. I love that so much. And I think that that's so helpful. So how can folks find you, reach out to you if they want to start working with you? How should they do that?
Yeah, definitely. And I would love that. I love that additional piece you added, is like preparing yourself for the day. And so thank you so much for having me on. This is so much fun. I agree. I could just talk to you all day about this stuff. So I would love that. Yeah, you can find me on Instagram at julie.menden. Also, if you're on LinkedIn, Julie Menden. So pretty much all the platforms. If Facebook is your thing, I have Julie Menden Coaching. And I also have a private community for those who aspire to lead, is the group. All of those platforms you can find me. Julie Menden is where you'll find me on all of those.
And is it okay if people DM you directly?
Yes. Yep. Okay. I'm always open to that. I love to just learn about other people, their story, make those connections. So reach out for sure.
All right. Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Julie. I really appreciate your time, and it's been a pleasure having you.
Thank you.
Until next time, continue to wonder boldly.